Deborah, how long have you been a part of this community or part of the North?
Well, I was fortunate enough to get a job and move up here in 1980. And it was a delightful time in Pengnertung. And for us, I came with my husband. We were fairly young. And I had always wanted to come to the North since I was a small child. Just hearing stories about the North, but I thought I would never make it up here. At the time, people didn't travel up here. And the only jobs for women were nurses and teachers, and I was an artist. And then I heard about this position available to manage a tapestry studio, and a weaving studio actually. So not just tapestry, but all kinds of weaving. And that was my specialty, and I had just graduated from the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design. So I came up here with my husband for 3 years, and then I began coming as the arts advisor from 1990 on. And that was when the manager of the studio was the woman I'd been training, an Inuk woman from Pengnertung, G.T. Maniapik, and she was the manager for 10 years. And during those 10 years, I would come up for a few weeks to help facilitate the creation of new tapestries and whatever other help they needed. And in 2007, I was asked to come back and do some more training, train a new manager, train more tapestry weavers, and do some marketing, arts advisor work. So it's been almost 4 years, and we've accomplished a great deal over that time. So I've felt very fortunate to be able to come back and reunite with the friends that I've made here through the years. Friends who were teenagers when I left in 1983 and now are grandmothers. So I've seen a lot of change in the community.
So when we talk about change in the community, what was the original vision of this, and sort of where are you now in that vision?
Well, the history of Pengnertung is complex. It's as a village, it didn't occur naturally. The families who live here were brought in from camps all over Cumberland Sound. And they were roughly brought in at the same time, mid-60s. There had been some living here since the 20s, but it was basically an outpost camp. Hudson's Bay Company and the church and the hospital. But in the 60s, all the families were brought to live here so their children could go to school. And it was kind of an unnatural occurrence to bring different, almost like, the word tribes doesn't really apply to the Inuit, but almost like bringing a number of different tribes in to live together in a very small place, because this is a small shelf of land with mountains behind and water in front. And at that time, people more or less stayed here. They didn't have the boats that they have now. They only had kayaks. And in their dogs, they lost most of their dogs, so they couldn't travel much in the winter. But that was in the 60s and 70s. By the time we came in the 80s, people had started to become used to this being a community. It had forged together as a community, and there was more opportunities for people. And one of the opportunities was a federal government program for weaving. And they decided, the federal government looked around at each hamlet in Nunavut, each small community, to see what the people wanted in terms of occupation. And in some communities, carving really took off, and others printmaking. And Pengnertung was chosen for weaving. And the first manager-teacher came up in 1970, Donald Stewart, and hired 5 young weavers, all in their late teens, one of whom still works here today, Olasi Akalukchuk. And he taught them fabric weaving, blanket scarves, and tapestry. So the tapestry began right at the beginning. And by 1972, they held their first exhibition of Inuit tapestries at the Canadian Guild of Crafts, Quebec, in Montreal. And it sold out. And most of the pieces went to national institutions and provincial institutions. That exhibition was vital in publicizing the fact that tapestries are part of Inuit art. Everyone's familiar with prints, with carvings, but tapestry only being done in this one community, it hasn't been as familiar, and that exhibition really helped establish tapestry. But it's taken quite a while for most Canadians to become aware of woven Inuit tapestry. So we're still working on that. We have exhibitions all across Canada. We had a tour of Europe last fall. We just sold a piece to the National Gallery of Canada. They own pieces from that first collection, and now they own a recent piece. But the main point of weaving being introduced here was to provide employment for women. The federal government recognized in the 70s that the women needed more employment because the men weren't hunting as much. The women didn't have much sewing to do. They didn't have to make tents anymore on a regular basis and hunting clothing. So the women really took to weaving very quickly. By the time I came, in 1990, there were 12 weavers. And when I left the first time in '83, we had 16 weavers. And it's always been a joyful place. People supporting each other, weaving, taking their coffee breaks. I remember back in the early '80s, the game of patik, which is a dice game, was very popular. And there'd be 16 people on the floor in a big circle playing patik. The coffee breaks started to become a little too long, but now we do it mostly on birthday parties. So we always have a birthday. If someone's celebrating their birthday, we always have cake and games. So it's a place where people can just be themselves, have fun, work hard, and they're very proud of their work, whether they're weaving scarves and blankets, amautic ties, which are the ties that go around the baby carrying parka to keep the baby in place. We make those by commission. So the local women and women from other communities choose their own colors, and they have their own unique set of amautic ties. So that's something the women are very proud of. So it is an occupation. It's not like working at the Northern, and I'm not putting the Northern down, but it's not. It's a job that carries cultural pride. The tapestries have developed. By 1980, when I arrived, they were being done in editions of 10, which meant that one would be designed. A weaver would choose a drawing from an artist in the community, and by that time we were working with about 12 to 16 different people, and interpret that piece into tapestry, and then it could be repeated up to 10 times, which was a brilliant way to do it, because the design time was then reduced and they could go on weaving. People, not one weaver would weave the whole edition, but they would take turns. So they were always doing a different kind of tapestry. They had a variety. They'd have a variety of work. By the time I left in '83, the tapestries were selling. Every tapestry we made sold, and we had 16 weavers, and everything sold. So it was very, very successful, and I think for that reason, because it has had very high success through the years, it's always had funding. Sometimes that funding is harder to get than other times, but the subsidies that are required for the high cost of employment, the high cost of running this facility, are essential. But it's a place that Nunavut is proud of. It's as someone said the other day to me, it's the jewel in the crown of Nunavut. So we're looking at a watercolor by artist Andrew Kopic. He's a printmaker over in the print shop, and he's been a printmaker since he was 14, so for quite a few years. And now he does painting as well as watercolor. And this is a design that he has done for a couple who would like to purchase, that basically they have commissioned their own tapestry for their home. As you can see, it's a couple, the woman sitting on the komatik, being driven by a dog team of 5 dogs, and they're heading across the winter ice towards, who knows, perhaps they're visiting a family, another family's camp, or their own family. Maybe they're coming home from hunting. The picture is the size that Andrew has painted it in order to be half the size of what the finished tapestry will be. So we trace the image, capturing every nuance of shape in the drawing, and then we photographed the tracing and had it enlarged to this 4.5 foot wide by 6.5 foot long pattern. So it's cut in half because that's how it was printed. And we're working on the bottom half now to fill in the colors, to come up with a color palette that captures Andrew's painting. So what we have here are a variety of different companies' wools. So we have this very soft wool, and then we have a harsher wool, but it has a nice body, and a thicker wools, and lots of different colors. We have them all spread out here. Plus we have color cards of colors that we can use
Sorry,
that we
Deborah,
may
I'm just
not.
gonna stop you there. I just
Okay.
have the audio.
Am I
got
talking
really-
too fast?
No, it was just a little louder than I had set. So
Okay.
now we're.
I
now
tend to
it's
talk
set
louder
again.
as I get nervous.
Okay. Here we go. We're still
Okay.
going.
So we also have color cards here to choose other colors from. In order to do a color palette, we weave every color on this. This is a copper, it's a plumbing pipe, copper pipe loom, which is very, very handy for this kind of work. And what I'm doing here is I'm weaving a strip of colors that are mixed colors, so darks and lights and medium tones all together, in order to achieve the colors that are in the watercolor. And for each color that I design, I put it on a card and give it a number or a letter. And sometimes we have so many colors that we go through the alphabet, we go through the numbers up to 100, and we go through the syllabic system. So we end up with 3 or 4 different files. So once the colors are woven and put on the card, they're labeled on this cartoon. It's called a cartoon. That's the international word for tapestry pattern, a cartoon. So they're labeled, and that takes quite a while. And sometimes the weavers, if they're ready to start weaving, will start with the first half, and myself or other weavers who are doing the colors will continue with the second half. So today the bottom half is going to go on the loom, and Kataisi and Olassi over here are going to start weaving it. By the time they've got partway through, the second piece will be ready. And I'm going to show you where the pattern fits, where the cartoon fits with the loom. The loom we use for commissions and larger pieces is 12 foot wide. It's state of the art. It's a Shannock loom from Washington State. So the 2 weavers here, Olasiak Lukjuk and Kataisi Kaki, have just finished a tapestry. They're doing the sewing off of a few ends, and then we'll be starting the design of the piece that I just showed you. So I'll get a little closer here to show you that behind the tapestry that's finished is the drawing. It's the cartoon that they followed. And when they're weaving it, they pull it forward so that the image, we can't see it now because they've finished weaving, but the image is right behind these threads. And they transfer these lines on the image right onto these threads. And then they follow them to weave. And I'll illustrate that over here. We can do that after. Okay. So Kataisi and Olassi are finishing off some of the little slits that are formed when they're weaving. Most of it is done while they're weaving, but there are some that have to be sewn up afterwards. So they're just doing that fine sewing, and there's just some of it that needs to be done. The threads that a tapestry is not made on a backing. There's no backing. The backing is created, or the piece itself is the backing. And it's created by putting these cotton threads on the loom, and they're called the warp threads, and then weaving into them. So the fabric is a combination of the cotton warp threads and the woolen weft threads. So these ones are vertical and these ones are horizontal, and it's a grid. And so with tapestry, when you have a lot of circular shapes and curves, you're going against the grid. But that's the way tapestry works. Some tapestry is very geometrical because that's what's quite natural with the warp and the weft. But you can weave just about anything in tapestry if you have the skill, and the skills take quite a long time to learn. Kataisi's been weaving here since 1975, and Olassi started in 1970.